I had always kept my financial success hidden from my family, but when they called me a burden, I decided to reveal my secret, a $1 million portfolio I had quietly built. The shock on their faces was evident as I shared how I had invested carefully over the years. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to envy, and in that moment, I realized how little they had truly understood about me. For so long, I had felt dismissed and underestimated, but now, I finally had something to show for all the hard work I'd put in. It was a turning point for me, and I could see how it shifted the way they viewed me. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, feeling like the ground was slipping out from under me. Everything around me seemed to fade away, leaving only the cold sting of my brother's words. "You're nothing but a burden to this family," he said, his voice full of frustration and anger. I could feel the weight of those words crashing down on me, each syllable harder to bear than the last. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. The contempt, the disregard, the sheer finality in his voice. My own brother, the one who had grown up with me, who knew the darkest corners of my soul, had just branded me with a label I couldn't escape. Burden. I had always been the one who pulled my weight, who sacrificed so much for the people I loved. But now, here I was, standing in the middle of a storm I hadn't seen coming. It had started as a typical family dinner. Laughter, chatter, the hum of daily life. We were gathered at my parents' house, where I'd spent countless weekends growing up. The familiar smell of roast chicken filled the air as my mom moved around the kitchen, trying to get everything perfect, as she always did. But then the conversation shifted. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary at first, just a talk about bills, about expenses, about life. But slowly, the words turned colder, sharper. They began with subtle hints, questioning why I hadn't contributed more to family expenses in recent months. I had been careful to keep my financial situation private, something I'd worked hard for on my own. My brother, especially, had no idea how much money I had set aside or what I had accomplished over the last few years. And then, out of nowhere, he had erupted, accusing me of taking advantage of everyone. The tears that welled up in my eyes weren't from sadness but from sheer disbelief. This was my family, my people, the ones I had given so much for. And now, they were calling me a burden? I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to explain all the sacrifices I had made for them, how I had taken the brunt of responsibilities that no one else could handle. But the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, silent, feeling the walls close in. My mother, who had always been the glue holding us together, looked down at her hands, avoiding eye contact. I could tell she was ashamed, but she didn't say a word. And my father, who had once told me I was capable of anything, simply nodded, a distant look in his eyes. They had all just stood there, watching as my brother's words landed like daggers. How had I ended up here? How had it come to this? For years, I had believed that family was everything. I believed in loyalty, in unconditional support. I had always given everything I could, even when it meant putting myself last. I'd been the one who showed up when everyone else was too busy. I had taken on responsibilities that no one else would, doing things that no one saw. And yet, in that moment, I felt as if everything I had done, every effort, every sacrifice, had been forgotten. Was it all in vain? The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't just the words my brother had thrown at me. It was the realization that everything I had done for them, everything I had given, had been so easily dismissed. I had been fighting for their approval, for their love, and in return, I had received nothing but resentment. The very people I had trusted with my heart had turned on me. My brother's voice cracked as he spoke again, but this time it was quieter, as though he felt guilty for what he had said, but still too proud to apologize. "You're just draining us," he muttered. "We're tired of picking up your slack." The room fell silent. The air felt thick, suffocating. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with the weight of his words. I wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, how much I had done for them, but instead, I just nodded silently. What was the point? How could I explain something they didn't want to see? How could I show them that the years of sacrifice weren't about obligation, but love? In that moment, I realized that no matter how much I tried, they would never truly understand me, never fully see what I had been doing behind the scenes. I had been so consumed with helping them, with ensuring their happiness, that I had neglected myself. And yet, when the time came, it was clear that none of it mattered. I was still the outsider in my own family, still the one everyone resented for being too much to handle. It was the ultimate betrayal, one that shattered everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. And as I stood there, fighting back tears, I made a decision. No more. No more would I allow them to control me, to make me feel small. It was time for me to stop living for them and start living for myself. I left that dinner with a burning sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. The weight of my family's words was heavy on my shoulders, but there was something else lurking beneath the surface, something I hadn't yet realized. A feeling that this was the moment everything would change. This was the moment I would stop being the burden they thought I was. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a secret. A secret that could completely alter the course of everything. And in the wake of this betrayal, I was ready to show them. I had always thought of myself as someone who put family first. From a young age, I had watched my parents work tirelessly, never asking for anything in return, always putting the needs of their children before their own. And I admired that about them, the dedication, the sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, I had picked up the same habit, the same belief that love was defined by giving, by constantly putting others before yourself. Growing up, it was always my siblings and me, together, against the world. I was the eldest, and in many ways, I took on the role of caretaker for my younger brother and sister. My mother worked long hours at a small boutique, and my father, though always loving, was often distant due to the pressure of his own job. I remember the late nights I would stay up helping my younger sister with her homework, or the weekends I spent cleaning the house because our parents were too busy to do so. It never felt like a burden, not back then. It felt like love, like a way to show my family that I cared, that I would always be there for them. My parents didn't have much, but we made do with what we had. I wore hand-me-down clothes, and sometimes our meals were simple, spaghetti or beans and rice. But there was always love. There was always a sense that no matter what we went through, we'd be okay because we had each other. But as time went on, I started to notice something. My parents were getting older, and while they still worked as hard as they always had, they weren't able to keep up the same pace. The weight of their exhaustion began to show. It wasn't just the physical toll of their jobs, but the emotional burden of trying to provide for a family in a world that seemed to be getting more expensive and more demanding by the day. My brother, always the more carefree one, didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. And my sister, who was still young at the time, couldn't grasp the sacrifices that I made. I started working at a part-time job when I was 16, at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. It helped pay for groceries, for my little sister's school supplies, and even for some of the medical bills that piled up when my father's health started to decline. I took on more responsibilities, more hours, more pressure. And with each passing day, I felt myself becoming more and more isolated, more disconnected from my friends and even my family. They didn't understand the weight I carried. I didn't want to burden them with my own struggles, so I kept my emotions hidden. I smiled through the exhaustion, through the anxiety, through the loneliness. But inside, I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I was living for everyone else, sacrificing my own dreams, my own ambitions, just to make sure that they were okay. I didn't mind it at first, but over the years, I began to feel invisible. Like a shadow that everyone relied on, but no one really saw. I didn't want to feel resentful, but there were moments when it was hard not to. I sacrificed my own happiness to make sure that the family stayed afloat. When I wanted to go to college, I told myself that I couldn't, because my parents needed me more than I needed a degree. When I dreamed of traveling, I set those dreams aside to help pay bills. My brother, on the other hand, had always been more focused on his own life. He went to college without a second thought, living in his own world, pursuing his own goals, and never once asking how I was doing. My sister, still in her teens, was still under the care of my parents, unaware of what I had given up to help keep things together. It wasn't that I resented them, it was just that I felt invisible. It was as if my role was to hold everything together without ever asking for help. The more I gave, the more they took, and the less they seemed to notice. And the more I did for them, the more I buried my own desires, my own needs, and my own dreams. I had learned to stay quiet, to not ask for anything. I had learned to smile through the pain, to shoulder the weight of responsibility without complaint. My parents had taught me that. But deep down, I yearned for something more. I had dreams I kept hidden, aspirations that I locked away because there was no time, no space, no opportunity to pursue them. I wanted to be successful, not just for myself, but so that I could give them everything I thought they deserved. I wanted to build something for the future, something that would allow me to step out of the shadows and into the light. But I didn't realize that in my pursuit to care for everyone else, I had lost sight of myself. I had become the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything. I didn't think about what I needed because I thought that being there for them was enough. And then, my secret began to form. While I was working, paying bills, and sacrificing everything I had, I began to notice opportunities that others weren't seeing. I started learning about investing, about personal finance, about ways to build wealth. I didn't have much to start with, just a few $100s here and there from side gigs, but I knew enough to understand that if I played my cards right, I could build something substantial. I was cautious at first, unsure if it was the right decision. But over time, I began to put small amounts of money into stocks, into real estate, into ventures that seemed risky at first, but turned out to be smart moves. I learned how to analyze the market, how to diversify, and how to take calculated risks. Slowly, my portfolio began to grow. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy, but it was steady. It was the one thing I could control, the one thing that gave me a sense of independence amidst all the chaos. I didn't tell anyone about it. It wasn't out of shame or fear, but because I didn't want them to see it as something to take advantage of. I didn't want to be seen as the person who had money when everyone else was struggling. So, I kept it a secret. I built my portfolio quietly, bit by bit, and before long, I had amassed a small fortune. Not a fortune that would change the world, but a fortune that could change my life. I kept it hidden, even from my family, because I knew that once they found out, everything would change. And then, in that moment at the dinner table, everything came crashing down. My brother's words, the harsh judgment, the accusation of being a burden, it shattered something inside me. I had given everything for them, and yet I was still seen as a liability. It was then that I knew it was time to stop being the shadow. It was time to reveal the secret that would finally show them who I truly was. The night I was branded a burden by my own brother is a moment I'll never forget. I can still feel the sting of his words, as if they were etched into my very skin, marking me in ways that couldn't be erased. The betrayal wasn't just in the words he used. It was in the way he said them, as though he had been carrying this anger for a long time, waiting for the right moment to unleash it. I had spent so many years pouring my heart and soul into my family, and yet, in an instant, it felt like all of it had been reduced to nothing. As I left my parents' house that night, I tried to process what had just happened, but it was like my mind had shut down. The world outside seemed to mock me with its calmness. The night sky was clear, the stars twinkling in their familiar patterns, yet I felt completely disconnected from everything I had once held dear. It wasn't just that my brother had hurt me. It was the realization that I had been fooling myself for years. I had convinced myself that all the sacrifices, all the quiet efforts, would eventually be recognized, that they would see the value in what I was doing for them. But instead, I had been overlooked. It wasn't the first time I had been taken for granted, but it was the first time that the pain had been this sharp. I tried to shake it off. I tried to tell myself that I shouldn't care, that my brother's words didn't matter. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. His words stung because they reflected something I had been avoiding, the truth about how my family really saw me. I wasn't the dependable daughter they thought I was. I wasn't the one who could always be counted on to handle everything. I was someone who had been holding everything together, but at the cost of my own identity. I had been playing a role, not living my life. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep, pacing around my apartment. The soft hum of the city outside was a stark contrast to the whirlwind inside my mind. The pain was raw, but it was also mixed with something else, a sense of clarity that I had never felt before. My family had made it clear that they didn't understand my sacrifices. They didn't appreciate what I had done for them, nor did they seem to care. And while it hurt, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something much bigger. I had spent so long being the person everyone turned to when they needed help. I had always been the one to pick up the pieces, the one to say yes, even when I didn't have the strength to do so. But the truth was, I had been quietly building something of my own, something that had the potential to change everything. I looked at the pile of papers scattered on my desk, the financial reports, the stock charts, the investment plans I had carefully crafted over the years. They were my secret. They were my future. I had invested in companies, in real estate, in opportunities that had paid off, some small, some large, but all of them had added up to something much more significant than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just money. It was power. It was freedom. And it was something I had earned, all on my own. I had kept this secret from my family because I didn't want them to see me as someone different. I didn't want them to view me as a source of wealth, or worse, as someone they could take advantage of. But now, after the betrayal, I realized something. I had spent too much of my life worrying about what they thought of me, trying to prove my worth to people who would never truly see me. It was time to stop hiding. I spent the next few days going through every detail of my investments, making sure everything was in order. There were some that had done better than expected, some that had fallen flat, but overall, my portfolio had grown beyond my expectations. I had made over $1 million in the past few years, an amount I had never dreamed of when I first started. And while it wasn't the kind of fortune that would make me famous or change the world, it was enough to change my life. The weight of the secret I had been carrying lifted off my shoulders as I made the decision to reveal it. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to shrink back into the shadows. My family had underestimated me, and now it was time for them to see who I really was. I knew the moment I revealed my success, everything would change. My family would be forced to confront the truth. They had seen me as the one who needed their help, the one who was always struggling, when in reality, I had been quietly building something that could give me the independence I had always longed for. I wasn't the burden they thought I was. I was the one who had built something substantial with my own two hands. The question was, how would they react? Would they be proud of me, or would they see me as a threat? I didn't know the answer, but I was ready to find out. The next family gathering was soon approaching, and I knew that it was time. I would no longer let my brother's words define me. I would show them who I really was. Not the girl who had spent years trying to prove her worth, but the woman who had taken control of her own destiny. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. As I sat in my apartment, preparing for the confrontation that was sure to follow, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had spent too many years allowing others to dictate my life, but that was over. This time, I was in charge. I wasn't going to let their judgment define me any longer. When I finally walked into my parents' house again, I was different. I wasn't the same person who had left there broken-hearted just days before. I was stronger. And I was ready to show them that I was no longer the burden they thought I was. I was the one who had the power to change everything. It was the day of the family gathering, and I could feel my nerves simmering beneath the surface. The calm, quiet determination I had built up in the past few days was now being tested by the weight of the decision I had made. I was about to reveal the one thing I had kept hidden for years, a secret that could change the way my family saw me, perhaps forever. I wasn't just going to tell them I wasn't a burden. I was going to show them. As I prepared to head to my parents' house, I couldn't help but think back to the conversation that had shattered everything. My brother's accusations still rang in my ears, but the hurt it caused had been replaced with something stronger, the desire to finally step into my own power. For too long, I had allowed my family to define me. They had seen me as the one who was always there to pick up the pieces, to help them through tough times. But they had never seen the effort, the sacrifices I had made to build something for myself. It was time to change that. When I arrived at my parents' house, the usual warmth was absent. It felt cold and distant, as if everyone was still processing the words my brother had said. My mother was in the kitchen, her hands busy with preparing dinner, but her eyes were distant. My father was reading the newspaper, occasionally glancing up, but there was an air of tension in the room that hadn't been there before. I could sense the hesitation in the air. They didn't know what to expect. They probably assumed I was coming back to apologize for the scene at the dinner table. But I wasn't there for that. I had spent enough of my life apologizing for who I was, for what I had been forced to become. This time, the only thing I was going to do was reveal the truth. I took a deep breath before I spoke. "I need to talk to all of you," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies that fluttered in my stomach. "And I need you to listen, without interrupting." The room fell silent, everyone turning their attention toward me. My brother, who had spoken so harshly just days before, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. My father set down his newspaper, his eyes narrowing in anticipation. My mother paused in her cooking, her hands frozen in place, sensing the gravity of the moment. I had their full attention, and I knew this was the moment that would define everything. I felt a strange sense of power in the silence that followed. It was as if I had finally taken control of the narrative, like I wasn't the one being judged or dismissed. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what they might think. I had something to show them. "I've been keeping something from all of you," I continued, trying to keep my voice calm, though it trembled slightly. "Something that, maybe, I should have shared a long time ago. But I didn't, because I didn't want anyone to think I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I didn't want to be seen as the one who had more than everyone else, or as someone who could be used." Their eyes were fixed on me now. My brother, whose words had hurt the most, leaned forward slightly, as if he was trying to process what I was saying. My mother's expression softened, though there was still uncertainty in her gaze. My father looked like he was waiting for me to continue, not yet fully grasping what I was about to reveal. I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The secret that I had carried for so long was finally on the verge of coming out, and with it, a truth I knew would change everything. I had never wanted to flaunt my success, never wanted them to see me as someone different. But I could no longer stay silent. I needed to show them the person I had become, not the burden, but someone capable of building something for herself. "I've been investing," I said, watching their reactions closely. "Over the last few years, I've been building a portfolio. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want anyone to think I was doing it to show off or to get attention. But I've made a substantial amount of money, more than I ever thought possible." The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke for several long seconds, and I could feel the weight of their surprise, their shock. My brother's face shifted from one of disbelief to confusion, then slowly to a flicker of something else, perhaps envy or realization. My father's eyes widened, his gaze sharpening as he tried to process what I had just said. My mother's mouth hung slightly open, as though she couldn't quite grasp the words coming from me. I didn't want to be seen as the one who had more, the one who had figured it out when everyone else was struggling, I explained, my voice now stronger. I didn't want anyone to think that I was some kind of threat or that I was showing off. But the truth is, I've worked hard for this. Every dollar I've earned by making smart decisions, by being careful with my money, by learning and growing in ways that no one saw. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you or make you feel like you owed me anything. But the truth is, I'm not the person you think I am. I'm not the burden. I'm someone who has made something of myself, despite everything. My brother's expression had changed again, from confusion to guilt. He hadn't expected this. No one had. I could see the way his mind was racing, how his pride and arrogance were battling with the reality of what I had just revealed. I knew what he was thinking, the same thing I had thought for years. How had I managed to keep this from them? How had I hidden it for so long? I watched as his eyes flickered from me to my parents, who were both now looking at me with a mixture of awe and disbelief. My mother, who had always been my biggest supporter, stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with a quiet pride. "I didn't know," she said simply, her voice tinged with emotion. "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I had allowed myself in days. "I didn't want you to treat me differently," I said. "I wanted to prove to myself that I could do this on my own. And I did. But now I realize it's time for you to see who I am. Not just the person I've been for all these years, but the person I've become." The room was still silent, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. The tension had shifted. It was as if everything had been laid bare, and there was nowhere to hide anymore. My family had no choice but to confront the truth, how little they had known about me, and how much I had been holding back. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about proving them wrong or seeking validation. It was about taking control of my own life and finally stepping into the person I had always been capable of becoming. I wasn't the burden they had thought I was. I was someone who had fought for her own success, and now, it was time for them to see that. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The room was heavy with silence, the air thick with the weight of everything that had just been revealed. My heart raced, but not from fear. Now it was anticipation. The quiet was deafening, but I could hear the thoughts spinning through my family's minds. My brother's face, once so sure and confident, was now a mask of confusion and guilt. My mother, who had always been the emotional center of the family, looked at me with a mixture of surprise and something else. Pride, maybe even relief. And my father, ever the quiet observer, was finally looking at me like he had never looked at me before. His expression filled with something between awe and respect. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was playing a part. I didn't feel like I was trying to be what everyone wanted me to be, silently carrying the weight of their expectations. I wasn't the responsible daughter anymore, the one who silently picked up the pieces. I wasn't the burden I had been labeled. I was someone else now, someone who had taken control of her own destiny, and now, it was time to let them see that. "You really did all of that?" My brother's voice broke through the quiet, and I could hear the disbelief in his tone. "All on your own?" I nodded, the weight of his words not lost on me. "Yes, all on my own. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but I made it happen. I worked long hours, took risks, learned everything I could. And now I have a future, a life that's mine." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe even shame. But there was something else there too. A flicker of respect, hidden behind the walls he had built up over the years. He was a proud person, but I could tell this was a humbling moment for him. It was clear that he hadn't expected me to have been capable of anything like this. He had never seen me as anything other than the one who was always there for everyone else, the one who needed help, the one who was struggling. I had always been the dependable, self-sacrificing sibling. But now, I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the person who had to constantly prove her worth. "Why didn't you tell us before?" My father's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to face him. His gaze was unwavering now, no longer distant. His eyes were sharp, full of something that felt like regret mixed with pride. I took a deep breath before answering. "I didn't want you to see me as someone different. I didn't want anyone to feel like they owed me anything. I wanted to prove that I could do it on my own, without relying on anyone. I didn't want to be the person who had more when everyone else was struggling. But I realize now that I've been hiding who I really am. I've been hiding my success, my hard work, out of fear. And that's not fair to any of us." For the first time, I saw my father's face soften, his mouth curving into a small smile. "I see," he said quietly. "We've always been a family that worked hard to get by. But we never thought you were hiding something like this. I'm proud of you, kid. I don't know why you kept it from us, but I'm proud of what you've done." His words hit me harder than I expected. All these years, I had been seeking approval, yearning for recognition from the very people who had raised me. But it wasn't until this moment, this one pivotal moment, that I realized I didn't need their validation to be proud of myself. I had worked for my success. I had fought for my independence, and in doing so, I had created something that was truly mine. No one could take that away from me. My brother finally spoke again, his voice quieter this time, more thoughtful. "I guess I was wrong about you," he admitted, his eyes flicking to the floor before meeting mine. "I didn't see it. I thought you were just, well, the way you always were. Always helping, always giving. But I didn't realize that you were building something for yourself all this time. I didn't see the sacrifices you made. I didn't see how hard you worked." I nodded, my chest tightening at his words. "I didn't expect you to. No one did. But I had to do this for myself. I had to stop being the person who only existed for everyone else." His face softened, and for the first time in years, I saw something real in his eyes. "I get it now," he said quietly. "I really do. I've been blind. I'm sorry." His apology, though simple, was a moment of growth for him, a shift in the dynamic that had existed between us for so long. And it was a moment of clarity for me as well. In the past, I had always tried to prove myself to him, to my parents, to everyone around me. I had spent so much time trying to meet their expectations, all while hiding the truth of who I had become. But now, I realized that I didn't need their approval to be proud of myself. I didn't need to apologize for what I had built, and I didn't need to hide it anymore. The dinner that followed was awkward at first, the tension still palpable as everyone processed the revelation. But slowly, it began to ease. The conversation shifted, slowly but surely, from the shock of my financial success to something more familiar. Talk about old family stories, shared memories, and the usual banter that had once filled the house with warmth. It was clear that the dynamics between us had shifted, but not in the way I had feared. There was no animosity, no resentment. Instead, there was a quiet understanding between us, a realization that I was no longer the same person they had once taken for granted. I was someone different now, someone who had built something of her own, and they could either accept that or not. But for the first time, I realized that I didn't need them to validate my worth. I had already done that for myself. As I sat at the table, laughing along with my family, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. The burden I had carried for so long had finally been lifted. I was no longer the person I had once been, the one who lived in the shadows of others, quietly sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of the family. I had reclaimed my own story, and with it, my future. This wasn't the end of my journey, but it was a new beginning. I had taken control, I had risen above the betrayal, and I had shown my family the truth of who I had become. The person I had always been, deep down, had finally emerged from the shadows, and I would never hide again. As I left my parents' house that evening, I looked up at the stars, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I felt different, stronger, more certain of who I was and what I had achieved. I had faced my fears, confronted the betrayal, and emerged with something far more powerful than money: self-respect. And with that, I knew the rest of my life would be mine to shape. No one could take that away from me.